Happy Friday, Culpeper Presbyterian Church family. This is Pastor Chris. I am sitting in my office recording this video for you. So you have been trying your hand for about 5 days at this idea of fixed hour prayer, this most ancient form of Christian spirituality. And I'm curious, how's that been for you? Especially those of you who may not have ever paid much attention to the when of prayer as opposed to the what of prayer. I want to read to you in two parts something that Ruth Haley Barton, a great writer today on spiritual disciplines or habits, has to say about fixed hour prayer, and maybe it will give you some language or a description of how you've been impacted by it this week. First, she writes, fixed hour prayer gives us a way to anchor our daily lives in rhythms of prayer, ensuring that we do not get too far into any day without orienting or reorienting ourselves to the presence of God in our lives. It is the simplest and easiest way to consecrate our entire day as service to God. I love that image of orienting and reorienting throughout the day. It's as if we as human beings are prone to wander, something Scripture says time and again about us, and what fixed hour prayer does is pulls you back to center. It orients you at the start of the day, and it reorients you throughout the day back to what matters most. Has that been your experience? Now, she goes on to write this about her own personal experience with fixed hour prayer. Quote, "The first time I participated in fixed hour prayer, I felt like I had come home to a place I had never been, and yet a place in which I truly belonged." Is that what it has felt like for you, perhaps? That maybe you had wished all along, maybe for even years, that your prayer life was more consistent, more structured, but more importantly, more meaningful. And as you have been purposeful about praying at fixed points throughout the day, has it seemed like, in her great expression, it's been like coming home? That this is the place you have always belonged. I'm going to tell you a story in a little bit about my own experience with fixed hour prayer that very much is like that for me. First, what I want to do is pass along a couple of resources to you. Now, I told you this week we're not going to worry a whole lot about the what of prayer. We're just going to deal with the when of prayer. But if you would like some help at practicing fixed hour prayer, I've got a couple of things I can share with you. First, doubtless, the leading expert or scholar on fixed hour prayer in our day, or at least the one who's popularized the idea the most, is someone named Phyllis Tickle. And she has produced a 3-volume set called The Divine Hours. This is the one for springtime. It's the one that's we're currently using. For those of us from a mainline church background, like a Presbyterian church, these fixed hour prayers and what she lines out in these books would feel very familiar to you. They're very liturgical. So in these books that span the entire year, you've got a selection of prayers and readings that would take you about 5 or 6 minutes. There's a morning reading, a midday reading, and then there's an evening reading. There's a psalm, there's prayer for needs or others, and it doesn't take you long to pray through them. As I am, these divine hours are going to appear in the story I'm going to tell you in a minute. But you'll find that it doesn't take long to do. and they're really multifaceted. So there's a link in this email to these books on Amazon. You can explore them, and if you think they would be a help to you, go ahead and give them a shot. Just so you know, I have used the Divine Hours in my own spiritual life. I've never done them 3 times a day. I've always usually used the Divine Hours once a day and prayed through its beautiful liturgy and prayer, and I find that that's sufficient for me. Now, a second resource is similar, but it's more contemporary, and it's probably a little more succinct. This is by Shane Claiborne, who is a leader in missional church ministry and social justice work. And this is called Common Prayer. And then the subtitle on the bottom is A Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals. And this has the same kind of structure. There's usually a psalm reading. There's usually a prayer for others. Because he is such a social justice advocate, you'll find there's a lot of outward prayers for mission and whatnot. I love this. This is a really neat tool, and I will incorporate it into my own prayer life and fixed hour prayer on occasion as well. And I will put a link to that book as well in this email. And what's really great about this Shane Claiborne book is that there's a website that I will also link in this email that every day has some of the prayers posted from that day's prayer and reading in the book. So every day you could go to this website for one of your fixed hour prayers, and you could pray through whatever is in the Shane Claiborne Common Prayer book. It's a neat thing to have. And then last, I want to share an app with you that someone in our church family alerted me to, and I think it's worth passing on to you. If you go to prayermate.net, you will find a description of an app that you can get in the Google Play Store for your phone. And what it will do is help you figure out what to pray when during the day you want to. So it will remind you of needs that you're praying for example. Or you can subscribe to a couple of services for free, like the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, and it will send you a prayer that you can use on this app during your fixed hour prayer. It even will set alarms for you to remind you to pray at the points during the day when you want to. So check it out. If you think that if you're a pretty phone-heavy person and you think it would help you, check out prayermate.net or the app in the Google Play Store. So here's my story about fixed hour prayer. I have not always done it in my own spiritual life. I gravitated toward different kinds of prayer early on in my 20s and my 30s. But as you've heard, I've told you the story in bits and pieces over our last 2 years together. When I showed up at my church in West Michigan, I walked into chaos, into a real mess, something that was going to turn hostile very fast. So what I found is that spiritually and emotionally, I was foundering. I felt like I was drowning, and I did not have the calm, the peace, the strength, and the wisdom to guide that church and those people through this hurricane of financial and interpersonal difficulties. And lo and behold, I read about fixed hour prayer. And so what I decided is that I was going to start to every day around midday just stop whatever I was doing, and I was going to practice fixed hour prayer. I'd always prayed in the morning. I'd always prayed in the evening before I went to bed, but I needed something in the middle of the day to, as Ruth Haley Barton put it, reorient me back to center. So I actually picked up a copy of Phyllis Tickle's Divine Hours, and every day, somewhere around midday, I would pray my way through the selection for midday. If I was at the church office, I would go into the sanctuary, I would sit somewhere on the first few pews, and I would pray my way through those divine hours. I actually have a very vivid memory of that. One day I was in the middle, literally in the middle, of praying through the midday selection in the divine hours, and I felt a tap on my shoulder, And it was two of the elders on the elder board, and they had come to see me because they were going to resign and leave the church. That is how difficult the situation was. And lo and behold, it even found its way into my midday prayer ritual. But here's what I would assure you. I have ever since, and that was back in my late 30s that I started that. And I have used fixed hour prayer ever since in some form or fashion. What I know about it is that if I had not discovered this ancient spiritual discipline, I would have drowned in those first 2 or 3 years at my last church. It is really the spiritual anchor that held me as I weathered that storm. And I think it can be that for you as well. So we're going to move on to another subject, another kind of spiritual discipline this coming Sunday. But I hope that you don't leave behind this idea of fixed hour prayer, praying morning, noon, and night all throughout the day. We'll talk again on Sunday.